Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Matt Travis, the CEO of the Cyber Accreditation Body. Matt, thanks for being here.
Justin, good to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So CMMC is here, finally. After so many years, the two rules are finalized and effective as of November 11th. It's kind of crazy having followed this program since 2019 during its inception, but it's officially here. So congratulations on that as one of the folks behind it.
Thanks. It's been a long and winding road, and most of the congratulations goes to the department personnel who were persistent and stayed with the program through all of the fits and starts. And you're correct that the Title 48 rule went into effect, which is what makes CMMC a mandatory program for eligibility for Department of War procurements and acquisitions. The Title 32 rule, which really breathed life into the program, that went into effect almost a year ago, last December in 2024. And that's what really got busy for us, because what's really considered the voluntary program, CMMC Level 2 certifications were then available for any defense contractor who had implemented the NIST standard and was ready to get that validated by a third party. So it has been busy for us since then, but it's nice to see the final piece of the regulatory puzzle be put into place. And if there's any remaining skepticism whether or not the department was serious about this conformity regime, I think you can now just look at the Code of Federal Regulations and see both rules there. And now the real challenge is to scale the ecosystem.
Sure. Well, we can get into that. I think many of our viewers and listeners will be familiar with what the Cyber Accreditation Body is, but it's kind of a novel concept, so I just want to make sure everyone is aware of your role, your organization's role. Can you explain a little bit about the Cyber AB and the role it plays in the CMMC program?
Absolutely. The Cyber AB is the exclusive accreditation body for the CMMC program, and so we do a lot of things under that responsibility. We're a 501c3 independent nonprofit organization that supports the department through a no-cost contract, so we don't receive any federal tax dollars or any revenue from the Pentagon. And while we do a lot of things like town halls that some of your audience may have seen, and we run the marketplace, the main thing why we exist is to instill trust and confidence in the program by making sure that, at least for Level 2 certification assessments, Level 1 is self-assessment for CMMC, and Level 3 is going to be conducted by the DIBCAC, the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center. But for Level 2, where we think most of the companies will be within the Defense Industrial Base, to get that third-party certification, we exist to ensure that all the assessors and all those assessment organizations are competent, that their people have been properly trained, pass the examination, meet all the requirements, that they're impartial, and that there are no conflicts of interest that haven't either been mitigated or avoided, and that there is no funny business in terms of folks who are trying to skirt the rules. So that's the enforcement role that we have. And then finally, there's consistency, that if you're a small defense contractor in the middle of Iowa, that you're getting essentially the same type of procedure in terms of the assessment that a large integrator would get elsewhere. And so it's that competency, impartiality, and consistency was really why accreditation bodies exist. So there are accreditation bodies that do a lot of accreditation for medical devices and forensic labs. This is an accreditation regime to make sure that those third-party assessment organizations are doing all those things properly, as well as the CAICO, which is certifying those individual assessors, which is also so important in the program.
Right. Well, we can get into kind of the ecosystem side, but I want to start by just level setting about how CMMC is being phased in, because though the rule is now effective, it's not like an immediate, fully effective program as far as where it wants to go over the next few years. I know we have sort of self-assessments starting here in year one. How do you see this ramping up? Because I know that there will be some third-party assessments that DoD allows to happen during this first year if the program office wants it, but it will primarily be self-assessments. So how do you kind of see this ramping up in the coming years to get to a fully effective program?
It will really be dependent on how the Pentagon wants to, how much on the gas pedal they want to push. But in essence, what you'll see in year one, which is, it's now started, the clock is ticking. For the next 12 months, you'll see requirements in new solicitations, so new contracts are being bid out, or potentially option years or contract extensions. they can be inserted, the department will be inserting level 1 CMMC requirements and also level 2 self-assessment. So level 2 is the bifurcated part of CMMC model where you could potentially get requirements that just require you to self-assess, or you're going to be required to hire a C3PO, a third party, to validate that. Year 1 of the phase implementation primarily focuses on level 1 FCI, Federal Contract Information self-assessment, or level 2 self-assessment for the 110 requirements in the NIST 800 standard. Now, the department in phase 1, in this first year, has reserved the right to insert the certification by C3PO requirements in select contracts. So we'll have to see, and I suspect we will see some of those. I don't know what programs would be, but you can imagine they're probably ones that are closer to operations and the tip of the spear, so to speak. So the department has reserved that right. So I think it's important to note that those are two different things, level 1 and level 2, right? So level 1 is the federal contract information. Level 2 is the controlled unclassified information. You can have companies that get both of those requirements because in essence they might have different scopes. Federal contract information is probably going to be more widely shared in some cases. Your financial controllers will need access to the contracts, maybe your business developers, whereas the CUI may be restricted in an enclave only to those people who are working on the project who actually need to store, transmit, or process CUI. So I think sometimes people think, well, year 1, I'm not going to be forced to hire a C3PO. I may have to do a self-assessment, and if I get level 1, then I'll just do level 2 instead. But there's really two different things. So folks need to kind of pay attention to the contracts that come out with CMMC requirements or to their own vehicles that have option years or extensions. What exact requirements are those contracting officers putting in there? That's year 1. Year 2, then we go to, you'll be seeing on a regular basis those C3PO certification requirements for level 2, and then in the third year, level 3. And then the department's plan is that by 3 years into it, we are at scale. The ecosystem is mature, and CMMC is just a way of life now.
Right. Well, and for the longest time with this program, I think there's been this perception that companies are just kind of taking a wait and see approach. Is this really going to happen? Clearly it is. But even now with this ramp up, are you seeing companies, organizations still kind of take that approach, or are they taking it more seriously? Are you seeing an increased interest or even demand at this point in certification?
We are seeing an increase, certainly an increase in the town hall attendance that we get at our monthly virtual town hall. We've seen an increase in the conferences, not only the ones that we put on, but the ones that we attend. But most notably to your question, Justin, we are seeing a continued growth in the number of level 2 certification assessments that are being done on a voluntary basis. We're just under 500 now for level 2. But also the number of individuals who are becoming assessors, or at least entering the training pipeline to become assessors. Now, some of those are coming from C3POs who need more personnel to conduct assessments, but we're also seeing a number of defense contractors sending their own personnel to become certified assessors, so they have some in-house expertise. And so the numbers of those classes that are trained for CCA or the apprentice level, which is the CMMC Certified Professional or CCP, are increasing. I still think there are some holdouts, to be honest with you. Folks are going to think, I'll just wait till I see it in my contract before I move out. I think the risk there is, which we've been beating this drum for a number of years, is that CMMC Level 2 is not something you can just assign some mid-level IT admin manager to do over a weekend. It really requires a whole of organization to buy in to not only the specific requirements of the CMMC standard, but really when you look at it, is cybersecurity inculcated on how you do business? That's what the assessors want to look for, is that it's not a checklist assessment or an inspection. It is, are you meeting the standard that the department has set for its business partners? And even at level 1, which a lot of people dismiss as, oh, it's just level 1, there's only 15 objectives. There are actually 59 assessment objectives when you drill down, 59 things you have to do at level 1. So for those companies who have either kind of procrastinated, because these requirements generally have been in their contracts anyway, CMMC is only the validation and certification that you've done that. For those companies who have been dragging their feet, I think they'll find themselves having to hustle a bit to get caught up, because it's not just the contracts that you might have that you're gauging, okay, when do I need to go ahead and implement? who knows what's going to be put out for bid, and you might find yourself with the opportunity cost loss of not being eligible to go after some of those new contracts that have CMMC requirements.
Sure. And yeah, it's certainly not something where a year from now you want to wake up and see that in your solicitation and not have done any preparatory work at all. Yeah. Well, let's talk about what we've learned so far. We've learned so far about organizations who have gone through and gotten a CMMC Level 2 certification, or perhaps have failed that assessment for at least the time being. You said just under 500 so far have gotten that voluntary Level 2 certification. What have you learned about that process, both from the assessor side and from the organization seeking certification, in terms of just what's important to be taking into account?
I think early on, Justin, we saw, so really Level 2 certification assessments started being conducted February, March of this year. And early on, anecdotally, we certainly heard a number of false starts where you had companies who had been following CMMC, thought they understood kind of the level of effort required, and then when the C3POs conducted that phase 1, so the CMMC assessment process has 4 phases. That first phase is really to ascertain if the company is actually ready to be evaluated. And so the C3PO is looking at their system security plan, they're looking at their schematic diagrams of their network and their scoping of what's in scope for the assessment. Do they have evidence ready? And in a number of cases, I don't have any stats, but we heard frequently from the C3POs that they had to call it off. Mutually, once the OSC, the organization seeking certification, realized all the things that they hadn't fully done, and the C3PO said, we might want to pause here and go back to work and call us when you're ready. There were a number of those. I'm hearing less of that anecdotally. I think from and that was coming really from the C3POs. From some of the defense contractors that we've heard from at our conference and elsewhere, what we continue to hear is what I touched on earlier, that it does require an organizational commitment, and that they realize there are physical security requirements, there are training requirements that HR has to be involved in, there are leadership requirements in terms of resourcing to making sure you're conforming to the 110 requirements. And that was probably the biggest takeaway. And the second one, which is really important, that you really need to know your external service provider. In this day and age, in 2025, a lot, if not most, of the defense contractors are using either a managed service provider, a cloud service provider, a managed security service provider to help with the administration and operation of their IT environment. Well, when you're using what CMMC calls an ESP, an external service provider, you are now bringing, most likely, especially if they're storing, processing, or transmitting CUI, into your assessment scope. And so it's critical that defense firms understand not only what their external service provider is doing for them, how are they characterized? Are they actually a cloud service provider? Because there are different requirements if it is a cloud service provider than it is if it's a managed service provider or a managed security service provider. So that understanding of who's actually assisting you in meeting all those 110 requirements, you'll get stopped cold if it turns out you thought you were using an MSP, but actually you're using a cloud provider based on what they're doing for you, and now there's a FedRAMP requirement in the mix as opposed to just a CMMC Level 2. So knowing who's helping you and knowing your organization is fully committed are probably the 2 biggest takeaways that we're hearing from industry.
Interesting. And then on the assessor side, as far as this is still a relatively new certification, what have they told you about just the experience, what they need, where maybe things have gone wrong and they need to do something different?
There has been some areas where clarification has been sought, again, especially early on. When you look at any federal regulation, it's generally written by a handful or more than a handful of attorneys, and they're not always, the language doesn't always sync with each other. And so in some areas, and again, I should have said up front, CyberAB is an independent nonprofit. I don't speak for the Pentagon on any of this. But I do think looking at how at least the 32 CFR rule, which establishes the CMMC program, was written, certainly when you parse the language, there's in some cases open for interpretation on exactly what the requirement is, whether it's a 10-day reevaluation period that the department provided, or that's point about what are my requirements if I'm a cloud provider or if I'm a managed service provider. And so the assessors were coming to us saying, hey, how do we deal with this? Because I'm not quite sure. I looked at their environment. I have questions and I can't really find the answer in the Code of Federal Regulations or even in the assessment guides. And we knew there would be that way. I kind of equate the beginning of CMMC to what in the Navy, when I was in the Navy, a shakedown cruise. When the ship comes out of the shipyard, you take it out to see where all the leaks are and what doesn't work. And so with CMMC, we saw some of those points of where clarification was needed. Things also like if you have a significant change to your network, what are the requirements then to get recertified down the road? So that's really what the assessors have been coming back to us seeking guidance. We meet with the Pentagon on a regular basis to kind of do a policy sync, and we were on the cusp of putting out some guidance, I think, before the shutdown occurred. So I'll be looking forward to re-engaging with the department and clarifying some of those areas that are still of some concern to assessors, making sure that, hey, as I said up front, consistency is important in CMMC. We can't have one C3PO looking at a configuration one way and another C3PO looking at it another way. And those are some of the things we're trying to iron out.
Are there still any open questions about just the general issue of reciprocity, where if I'm using a managed service provider or a cloud service provider who has already received a FedRAMP certification or has already received just a certification from C3PO for the same services, do I still have to go through this part of the assessment? Are there any open questions there, or how is that working?
I think there's still some confusion. There are a lot of use cases. There's no just one standard use case, because companies use different technologies, use different approaches. There's not just one way to meet the requirements of all those 110 requirements in CMMC Level 2. And so the nature of what are my requirements if I have a cloud provider that is FedRAMP moderate equivalent? How does that get validated by the C3PO? And then if it's on the MSP side, what exactly do they need to do? You mentioned reciprocity, which some people call inheritance. It's really what's on that shared responsibility matrix or the customer responsibility matrix. So if an external service provider, either one, it could be Microsoft, Google, or AWS with a cloud service, or it could be some small MSP that's providing services. Ultimately, that external service provider needs to be listing within your SSP on this responsibility matrix who's doing what. Because when the C3PO begins the assessment, they're going to just really go down the list. There are 340 assessment objectives for Level 2, and they go through each one. Okay, well, who's supposed to be doing this? Is it your cloud provider, or is it your own internal staff? And so there really isn't anything like a pre-validated list of requirements that, other than in cloud, right? Microsoft does not need to defend what they're doing. If you've signed up for AWS or GCC High or Google Cloud, those lists of inheritance or reciprocity are established, and the assessor can take it on face value. But if it's not in the FedRAMP marketplace, it's generally need to be validated through the assessment itself. So when you're talking to that defense contractor, they may need to turn to their ESP to explain how they're meeting this requirement. And so that's still, there's still some areas where I think not all of the defense industrial base is aware of what the requirements are. We're trying to help the Pentagon put out new guidance or updated guidance to help with those questions.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of effort to get out the message about CMMC over the last 5-6 years, certainly, but even since the CMMC 2.0 came online and they did the revisions, and there's just been a lot of discussion around this program. But where is the message, do you think, not reaching far enough at this point? Where does there need to be additional efforts just to ensure that folks are ready as self-assessments are now starting? Level 2 is coming in now less than a year.
It's an interesting question, because I think we have a pretty good loyal audience that tunes in once a month to the town hall, that shows up at our conference events or shows up at other industry events. That is such a small percentage of the affected community within industry. And in many cases, a lot of our loyal following are the members of the ecosystem, the assessors, the instructors, the practitioner consultants, and not the industry representatives. That's who we're trying to reach. How can we get small business, medium-sized businesses? I think the large companies in the DIB, your Boeings and Raytheons and Lockheed, they're paying attention. They've been doing this for years anyway. but it's level 2, whether there's 80,000 or 100,000 companies is going to be affected. How many of them are actually engaged in CMMC? And that's really the message that we try to take out when I go speak or appear on programs like yours, to just try to encourage folks, engage in the program. There are resources out there on the Department of War's CMMC website. There are resources on our website, and there are plenty of practitioner consultants who follow this very closely. I think we all need to do a better job of trying to reach out to the rest of industry that may have been so busy just executing their contract, or maybe thinking, well, this is a DC thing and I don't understand how this all works. Too many acronyms, too many initialisms, fits and starts. They've been talking about it for 4 years. Is this something I really need to pay attention to? I know I've been saying it for 4 years, you need to pay attention to it, but now I'm really saying it, that they need to pay attention to it, because as you just mentioned, it is now codified in federal law that this will be mandatory for being eligible for Pentagon contracts. And so it's very important that people pay attention of what the requirements are, and some of these evolving interpretations or guidance are going to help them implement successfully.
All right, thank you, Matt. We're going to take a brief break now to hear an industry perspective. When we return, we'll continue our conversation. You are watching the Risk and Compliance Exchange on Federal News Network.